Hello, cooking enthusiasts. This week's video is another frozen dessert, and in fact, another sort of holiday winter-oriented sorbet. And cranberries are actually an interesting ingredient to you can use fresh or frozen cranberries, and later in the recipe, we'll also be using 100% cranberry. With a lot of my sorbet recipes, I really focus on preserving the fresh fruit flavor, and this is not as important with cranberries. And the other factor with cranberries is their high natural pectin content. Pectin is, of course, the natural gelling agent present in most fruits. In order to activate it requires relatively high temperatures and high sugar content, as well as acidity, which is also in cranberries. So some type of cooking step is necessary to activate the pectin, and that is important because it's going to act as one of the stabilizers for the sorbet. I like the pressure cooker because we are cooking the cranberries in sealed containers, so you don't really have to factor evaporation in the cooking process. Now, there were a few mishaps that happened when making this recipe. The cranberries are cooked with previously caramelized sugar. There'll be more details about that in the written recipe in the description, but that caramelized sugar was in large pieces, and what you should do is grind it into a finer powder. Instead of all of the sugar dissolving into the cranberries, some of it did separate and actually completely sank to the bottom of the jars. So some of the future footage you will see is us dealing with that issue, but my narration as well as the written recipe will be more based on the ideal procedure that should happen. The other issue that did occur is that we weren't able to fit all of the cranberries and caramelized sugar into the jars. This isn't a huge deal, although again, the written instructions will tell you to cook all of the cranberries if possible. The standard high pressure setting on my electric pressure cooker is 35 minutes, and you could probably even reduce that to 25 minutes if you really wanted to, but we just let it run for the regular cycle and then let the pressure naturally release without venting. Once you are able to open the pressure cooker naturally, it is important to carefully work with the jars of cranberry while they are still relatively hot. The activation and gelling of pectin is not a reversible reaction. The idea is you want the other liquids and ingredients to be bound to that pectin rather than particles of cranberry gel suspended in the rest of the liquid. So the pressure cooked cranberries are placed in a high powered blender that can handle high temperatures, along with any remaining cranberries if you couldn't fit everything. You want to begin blending everything at a relatively high power while also adding the remaining dry ingredients, which are a small amount of dextrose, salt, stabilizers, orange peel, and a little bit of optional spices. We actually ended up blending this initial mixture for a solid 2 or 3 minutes on high, which I've obviously edited around to keep it warm through friction. Again, if your blender can't handle this, it's not totally necessary. You just need to blend it until smooth. After that blending, all you really need to do is incorporate the other liquids, which is cranberry juice. Be sure to get 100% pure cranberry juice with no added sugar, and a small amount of freshly squeezed orange juice. I know it's a bit of a pain to freshly squeeze, but the recipe requires fresh orange peel anyway, might as well. Again, because of that caramelized sugar separation issue I mentioned earlier, there's probably a lot of extra footage I have to either cut or fast forward around. But after all of the ingredients are combined and blended thoroughly, the mixture is still relatively warm. We place plastic wrap right against the surface and wait for the mixture to cool down before ultimately refrigerating overnight. Like all of my other sorbet recipes, I just leave everything in the blender container because after refrigerating overnight, it gets blended again, this time with the addition of a little vanilla extract. And you want to use extract instead of any other vanilla product because we actually want the very slight alcohol content for this recipe. And once that is smooth, it goes in the freezer for just 20 to 25 minutes to counteract any friction-based warming from the blend. And then it's ready to just churn in an ice cream machine like all of my other recipes. The texture is quite thick and luscious. That's all of the natural solids from starting with whole cranberries, properly activating the pectin, and in theory, binding all of that liquid to the pectin, so we essentially have a very slight pectin fluid gel. And we have some of my usual frozen dessert stabilizers, but the pectin definitely added something. It really increased in volume after churning even more than my other sorbet recipes. And normally I try to regulate the amount of air incorporation, also known as overrun, but for this particular flavor, it really worked out fine. The texture was quite nice and smooth, and the balance of sweet and tartness was, I think, just right. Those secondary flavors of orange and spices actually really came through, but again, those spices are definitely optional. And overall, I think this was a really delicious frozen dessert. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you for watching.